Okay, let's talk about your catchphrase. What is your catchphrase?
My catchphrase?
The title of your book? The title of your book?
Oh, I'll be right back. I must have said that close to 1 million times, I would imagine. And I always said, I'll be right back. Sometimes we'll be right back. And they were looking for a title for the book, and I said that. And they all said, that's wonderful. I said, no, I don't mean that I'm going to be right back. I just mean that I said that 1 trillion times. And I think it's a good title. And they did too.
Another trademark was the sort of that flower-shaped.
The asterisk. Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. I had a guy that did my very first set, and he was brilliant. I mean, big stars would come on the show. Like Gary Moore came on the show one time and said, "Who does your backgrounds and all your artwork?" And I told him his name. He said, "He's remarkable." And Dating Game just flat out stole it from us. They changed the asterisk a little bit, made it a little different in shape, but they stole it. This guy was so good, and we had a devil of a time getting him to move to Pennsylvania, but he was so talented. Oh, and understated and soft-spoken, and just did the job. He was brilliant at what he did. He made sets from scratch, and people would just be in awe of them. Other performers, other people would just raved about the scenic stuff. It's all perfect.
Do you have a favorite moment from the show?
Favorite moment? Without a doubt, it's Judy Garland and Streisand to be the first two. Those are moments I'll never forget. I was such a fan of both of these people. I have every album that Barbra Streisand made, everything Judy made, and I thought she was beyond talent. She was just remarkable. She did everything. She was a great actress. She was a fabulous singer. Oh, she was so talented. And I hated to see her life end so suddenly and so quickly. And I know a lot about that because I played golf with her husband, Sid Luft, a lot. And he didn't want to talk about it much, but he did tell me some incredible stuff. And I'll never divulge it because I just don't do things like that. I can't stand people who talk about people when they're not here to defend themselves. And but she had a lot of problems, and Liza seems to be doing the same thing that her mother did. Can't get herself straightened out either. And it's terrible when you know how brilliant people are, how talented they are, that they can't turn that stuff off. Apparently, she worked her like terribly, in the movies and the personal appearances she did. I don't know how she did it. I really don't. She was so fragile. It's just a little thing. And that day and age, the people that came out of that studio, if you just think about it a moment, they released a photograph, and I'm sure you've seen it, with all the MGM stars, and it's remarkable. I mean, you see Clark Gable and Errol Flynn in the same picture. And I didn't even know Errol Flynn was with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, but apparently he was or something. And all these great-looking ladies, Gerg Garson and all, they had such talent at that studio. And they had tremendous success. And that catalog of movies, my God, how anybody could buy that catalog of movies and then turn around and sell it. Those are movies that are beyond belief that Metro did. That was my favorite studio, and they were my favorite pictures. Definitely my favorite movies were out of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer.
Going back to your show, why did it go off the air in 1982?
1982, because I was tired. I was tired. And because I took over ownership, and I can't tell you what happened in the background by my former employers, because it was illegal, and I don't want to divulge that. And suddenly, 2 years went by, and all of a sudden, I went to work, and they're all waiting for me. And I had 6 months left, and they didn't pick up the option. And the sad part of it was that I had just made a commitment to Viacom, which is the second time they'd tried to buy me. Tremendous deal. And the last thing my guy said is, have you told the newspapers about this? And they said no. And the deal was to happen the next day. And they had told the newspapers about it. And that killed a tremendous deal. I hate lawsuits and courts, and I can't stand it. So I didn't do anything about it. So when I took the show, now here's what happened when I was on the air. I'll explain syndication to you. When I started, I would start on lame stations. I mean, the third station in the market, and it got such ratings. All of a sudden, I'm on the number one stations, and I had to do that all myself. I had to build the ratings up, so I'd be on number one. So I had the number one markets everywhere. Now Oprah has it. She didn't have to do what I did. Boom, they just put her on the stations, and it happened. I had to work my way up to CBS. I started on WOR in New York or some station like that, and all of a sudden the show was beating everybody on the big stations, and ratings were fantastic, and we were suddenly offered all kinds of money for the spots and all, and they sold it to CBS in a blink of an eye, and they did that all over the country, every station I can think of. And then suddenly to wake up one morning and lose this deal at Viacom, and suddenly say 2 years have gone by and I didn't know about this. Strange part of it is Don Rickles, my buddy, called me up one time and said he heard that was something was going to happen. I said, "There's no way. My contract is non-cancelable." I didn't know. This went on. So when I finally took the show over myself, I had to go to the bottom of the barrel stations. That's all that was left. I was on 100 and some odd stations, but they were terrible stations, All of a sudden, from CBS New York, I go to whatever, and so it was like starting over. And I just did it 2 years, and I said, "That's it. I'm not going to fight this anymore. I don't have the energy to fight this any longer." And it was enough anyway. It really was. But that's not the way I wanted to go out. And because the Viacom thing was sensational. Oh, they're huge. And they now own CBS. So that's the way the cookie crumbles.
You'd been on the air for so long. How had television changed from the moment you started that show till 1982?
Well, they've come in with these reality shows, some of which are good and some of which are unbelievably. I just read today where the Gotti show is going international. The Gotti show. Would you think that many people cared? Going international. I can't figure out what's happening to the business. It's not at all like it once was. The only person doing a show that I will watch, as far as talk shows are concerned, is Oprah. It's a fine, fine show. And she's got some great people with a great imagination trying things, and it's working. She'll be around a long time, as long as she wants to be. But we just let somebody sneak in the back door and pull some shenanigans on us. And the day I left that show, it had the highest November book in the history of my show. Go figure that one. But hey, I'm happy. I had a long, long run. There were only two other people that went as long as I did, and Johnny was certainly 30 years. He was longer than I did. Merv was maybe a little less than me, but I did almost 24 years. That's a long time for a business where 13 weeks is a career.
Where does the show library reside today? Where are the shows?
It's King World has the tapes today. You see, CBS bought King World, and Westinghouse bought CBS. So the tapes are there. I own half the tapes. That's another mistake I made, making that contract. I made a big mistake making that contract. I had the wrong people handling it. I should never given them any ownership of those tapes. I could easily have the muscle at the time to own everything. But in my mind, I didn't want to have to open a place and keep the tapes. It's expensive, and yet the tapes are playing everywhere on the face of the earth. Tiger Woods' tape is played everywhere on the face of the earth.
You actually didn't talk about Tiger Woods.
That happened. We used to have auditions, which I seldom attended. But this one day, when we were at CBS here in Television City, they had an audition, and one of the kids came over and said, "You should really see this little guy," because they knew how I loved golf and all. And there with his father, and I went over, and it's Tiger Woods is there, and I said to this girl, I said, the women are going to flip when they see this little guy on the show, because he's going to be on the show. No one had him. We took him. He was 2 years old. He walked out. Had the baby clubs over his shoulder. They went crazy. And then I said, when we booked him, he said, well, how will we use that? I said, get Bob Hope. He loves golf, and he comes on anytime we asked him. And I've never had all the things I've done, 7 presidents I interviewed, dignitaries, everybody you can think of on the show. And I'm going to answer Sinatra's question for you, too. We didn't have him, but we had everybody you can think of, Dean Martin, everybody in life you can think of. And that little guy with that tape has created more of a stir, because the odds against this little fella becoming the #1 player in the world, and he'll be that again very soon. He's the greatest thing that I've ever seen. I know a little bit about golf. There's never been anybody like this. Who in the world has ever won 4 major championships in a year in a row, whether it be Grand Slam or not? No one on the planet. No one. He's already accomplished more than anybody. He had more victories before age 30 and is still working on it. Jack Nicklaus had 26. Tiger Woods had 42. There's an example. So the guy is special. A lot of people don't want to admit how great he is, but he is. I've seen him hit shots, and I've heard the other pros interviewed after having seen the shot saying, well, what would you do in the case? Would you hit that shot 218 yards with a 6-iron over water the entire way? I wouldn't try that shot. Every one of them said, first of all, I don't have that shot. It was a downhill lie in a sand trap. He hit the ball 216 yards with a 6-iron. Wind at his back, yes. And not on the green was like a teacup, the smallest green, and it landed right next to the pin and trickled to the apron of the green. And the other guy thought, geez, I've got him tied. I'm on the green in 2, and he still. If you talk to that young Grant Waite, he would tell you that was unbelievable. Every pro in history would tell you that's unbelievable, that shot. They had a thing on the Golf Channel of 10 shots of his, and they would interview the other pros, and the pros would say, well, first of all, he's the only one on the tour who has that shot. So anybody who doesn't think he's great is listening to the wrong person.
Before we end the interview, I want to go back a little bit and ask you about some of your earlier television work that you did before the show. We skipped over. And my first question is, when was the first time you saw television?
First time I ever saw television? Actually, I was on the first commercial television show in history. And Bob Hope was on the show, and Kay Kyser had the #1 show in the country on radio. And I had made a record called Old Buttermilk Sky with him that was #1 for 19 weeks on the chart. And they asked me to do the show because Kay Kyser was going to do the show and wanted me to sing Old Buttermilk Sky. And everybody on the show was paid. I think Bob Hope was paid, but I don't think anybody else got any money. And it was commercial for Lincoln Mercury. It was the first commercial television show in history.
It was on KTLA?
KTLA, exactly. Good. Exactly.
And then, do you remember was that your first television appearance?
No, my first television appearance was, I believe, had to be Chicago. I was a staff singer at WGN, which is an independent station, goes everywhere now. And I did a show I hosted a show called Hi Ladies, but my first show was the one I talked about earlier with Ernie Simon, where they wanted me to take over the show and I wouldn't. They never forgot that, by the way, and I meant it from my heart. I didn't want to take, man took me off the street in Chicago and gave me a job, and I'm going to take over his show. No, no, I just wouldn't do it. I turned down a commercial, a beer commercial, which would have paid me about $40,000, which was a fortune then, because I don't drink. There's no way I'm going to sit there with a glass of beer and tell my viewers and all the people out there that I drink beer, because I don't drink at all. And there's a good reason for that, but we won't go into that. And but the first show had to be Chicago at WGN.
And you mentioned the show Hi Ladies. What was that about?
That was a talk show, and they had a female audience, and they had this a pretty good sized studio. I think it sat maybe 70 or 80 women, and they lined up every morning. It was quite wonderful, and I had everybody imaginable on there as a guest, everybody imaginable in motion pictures, because they all wanted to plug in a city like Chicago. They used to go out and really work, these people, these actors. They'd go on shows, local show. It was a local show, but Chicago's a big city. A lot of folks go to the movies in Chicago, and they came on the show, and no preparation. You didn't get a chance to prepare. They'd show up, and you'd be sitting there talking to some actor, and they'd hold a sign up, say, "Your next guest is Charles Lawton." I go, "What?" And because these people were larger than life, I was an usher. I saw all these movies in the theater, the Lamar Theater in Oak Park, Illinois. And I just knew all the movies. You know, very seldom did you walk down the aisle with a flashlight in those days. People say, "I'll find it, that's okay." And I stood there and watched these movies. Judy Garland, when she sang Over the Rainbow, oh my. It was... This is history, but it's wonderful history.
And seeing these people, you know, when you work with them now on your show, you weren't jaded at all, or
Jaded? God, I was so in awe of these people, these picture people. They're larger than life. When Frank Sinatra one time in California, I mean, and I had the show then. I was on the dais of this huge thing for Sinatra at one of the hotels. I can't remember which one of the big hotels here in Los Angeles. And I was looking, they were all sitting at this long table, and the lighting was horrible. So they all looked older than you could imagine. And I'm thinking to myself, it looks like a wax museum. They all look so old, these people. And they're legendary stars sitting there. Because everybody, when it was for Frank, everybody turned up. And Frank Sinatra walked in, and he looked at that same site, and he said, I can't repeat what he said in my ear, but he did say Wax Museum, but he had a lead in it I can't repeat. And it caught me so off guard, because it was exactly what I was thinking, what he said. And it did. Oh man, did they look old. But the lighting was horrible at that place. And then to go out there and be on the dais for this man, it was exciting. Oh, getting back to him, the one time I had a chance to get him on the show, I wanted to tell that story. He had a comic working for him named Pat Henry, who was very good. He made a deal with me. He said, if you'll take Pat Henry for a co-host on the show, I'll come in for the Friday show. I said, fine, because when he said something, he would do it, usually. So locally on the air, some girl who wanted to make a name for herself got on the air in the local news. This wasn't even going all over the country. And said, well, Frank Sinatra did one of his usual things today. He was supposed to be on a Mike Douglas show, and he didn't show up. He was listening to it at the Latin Casino in New Jersey, very close by. And all of a sudden, I got word that he wasn't coming to the Friday show. I cannot tell you what preparation we had done for the Friday show. It was going to be like This Is Your Life. And we had some films that he hadn't ever seen. His son told me that. They were remarkable things. Oh, we had a show planned. He would have really thoroughly enjoyed it. And he would have enjoyed being there. And he canceled. And once he says yes or no, there is no turning back, I found out from his son. He said if he said no, Mike, he's not coming. There's nothing I can do. He said, how about you, Frank? She said, I wouldn't dare. You kidding? And you know what I think, what I think about you. And I said, can't you, how about a handwritten note? Would somebody take a handwritten note? Let me explain. This girl has nothing to do with the Mike Douglas show. She does local news in Philadelphia. That's nothing to do with my show. She just said this because she's trying to make a name for herself. And I paid for it because he didn't come. What a preparation we had done for that show. Oh, my. And later on, after that, they had one of these huge shows on CBS. I can't think of which one it was. For some star, it might have been one of the Kirk Douglas or somebody, and where you know the show I'm talking about. I can't think of the name of it. It was on CBS, where they salute this star for the body of work that they have done. Harrison Ford got one.
Oh, AFI award?
Yeah, it's a huge show, and he sent me a letter because I had been to Marvin Davis's house one night, and I walked by, and he made eye contact with me, and he was talking to somebody else with their back to me, and I thought, I'm not going to interrupt this. I walked by, and I didn't nod or wave to him or anything, and he sent a letter inviting my wife and I to this huge thing, and we had a table with a lot of big stars, and he wrote, it was all, you know how it's all stenciled, the signatures and everything. He wrote a note at the bottom. He said, don't ignore me this time, and he signed it Francis. And I thought, oh my God, he thought I ignored him. I didn't do that on purpose. He thought I was angry about the Friday show where he didn't show. And we chose not to go to this thing because it's a mess. You sit there all night long, and it's forever. And we chose not to go because it's quite honestly, it's boring. You know, and they stop tape, keep going back. You're there forever. And I haven't talked to him since. And I have talked to Frank quite often, but Junior, that is, who's a very nice guy, and he's a good musician. He's majored in music in college and all. And but he was devastated the night. The Greek Theater is where Frank was, and he invited us. And he cut 2 of his songs out when he saw me in the front row. He knew Frank and I were close friends. And that bothered me. Why would he do that? The kid was so excited about singing, you know. And but those are the kind of things that happened with Frank. He just, when he sang I Did It My Way, he really meant it. He did everything his way. But he's still, to me, the greatest. I thought there's never been a greater singer than that, in my eyes.
Let's talk a bit about Cinderella.
In
1950.
When I probably was in dire need of a job, by the way, and an income. We're living in a little Burbank GI house. And suddenly this agent called me and he said, they've auditioned 500 and some odd people, fellows at Disney, and I got you an appointment. I said, 500? Yeah, Disney himself is there listening, so I walk in and I couldn't see. It's one of those glasses so you can't see the people through, but you know there's somebody in there. He was in there. And I sang, So This Is Love was the song. And he turned and said, that's him. That's what I want. I want that voice. He should hear it now, the condition I'm in right now. And it was like a real happening to me because we didn't have any money. I just came out of the service. We had this little GI house. We had some furniture. And we had twin babies. And they paid me $100 a day. Now, he is so thorough. If he gets busy on something else and you're there being paid, nothing happened the first day. I'm sitting there and I said to this fellow, I said, is he here? He said, yes, he's here, but he's not in that booth. And I said, how do you know? I can't see it. And he said, I just know he's not in that booth. He's busy on something. He said, don't worry, they're paying you $100 a day. And I thought, $100. And I did 9 days. And when I tell you, honestly, that I could have done in about an hour the entire thing, and they paid me $900. It was like I thanked God for that. I mean, we needed it so desperately. The very beginning of our life and our first little home and all.
Did you meet Walt Disney?
No, I never met him, and I wish I had. There, it was a true genius. But I tell you something. I did a week of shows at Disney World, and I was the first television show to film out of Disney World. And while I was there, he was dead and gone. Listen to this. Every time they'd say something that they had to do or something being done, well, that's the way Walt wanted it. And I had the feeling that it was eerie. I had the feeling he was still around. The man was, some of the things he thought about back in the 50s, and God knows how much longer, unbelievable or timely today. He was so ahead of his time. True genius, that man. Just think about, he was responsible for the entire score. He heard some bobbity boobity, some dumb song, and he hired the two composers of that song to write the whole score to Cinderella. And it won every award imaginable. It was fabulous, the songs and all. And so he really knew what he wanted, and he knew what was commercial. I mean, who would think a mouse image would become what it became? Just think about that. A mouse. And it's been around for 1,000 years. And it's just great. All of it's just great. Oh, wish I could have known him and met him.
Another appearances that you did in the 60s with the Ed Sullivan Show.
Oh my God. In the 50s? No, it wasn't that late. I did the Ed Sullivan Show when I had a television show, and I had a hit show, and it was in New York and everywhere. He invited me on the show, didn't know who the devil I was. But in those days, he was starting to slip, and he said some incredible things on the air that are also legendary. He said one time, I believe it was March, he said, "Happy New Year." And people were going, to tell you what, he said Happy New Year. It was incredible, some of the things he said and did in those days. He came, we rehearsed on Saturday, and he never came to the Saturday rehearsal. Never. All of a sudden he showed up, and I got sick that year, and I asked Jack Jones to fill my spot. He came in and he said, where's Mike? And I heard him say it. And I was sick, and I had Jack there, and I was on my way home, going back home. And but he didn't know when he introduced me what I did or anything. That I couldn't understand that, because my show was a hit at that time, and it's in New York and everything. Here's a young feller. He's going to sing, and that was a hit record. It was the #1 record, and the Beatles were second and third. The Men in My Little Girl's Life was what brought me to the show. And he said, and when I walked out, this is what killed him, when they weren't on air, I walked out on the stage and the audience applauded. He's the only one that didn't know who I was. And he's introducing me. So then he walked off stage right, and there's no exit on stage right. And he took my hand and pulled me over to this side. So that meant when he left, I had to walk this way, and there was no way to get back on stage. It was absolutely blocked off. I said, and I went like this to the guy back there. He said, he doesn't know. He just has a habit of pulling people over to that side. And I said, when can I get off? He said, when this next act finishes. I was stuck backstage. But it was an experience. But I'll tell you something, when you did that show in those days, you know how many people saw that show? 40 million people every week saw that show. And my record just went to the moon after that. Just unbelievable.
Stop and change the tape.